Call me Mr. President.
This is Rachel. Rachel is a science teacher. She is fed up. This is Ryan. Ryan is also a science teacher, but he tried GenerationGenius.com for free, so he's feeling pretty good.
If I can get some help in the back. Oh, wait a minute.
You already here in a minute.
Who's cold? We do have an open question. This is your business warm-up. So pull up that gray parchment paper and do this warm-up activity. Alright, warm-up question, parchment paper. It's this gray one. This is number 5. I know you held on to it for a while. This is number 5. I got a question. You weren't here for the first couple. I got a question. You've been here all year. I got a question. Why did you all be
Can I throw these things in the trash?
Would be a terrible idea.
How would that be a terrible idea?
Alright, I'll turn the music off so you can think.
No.
You have received back last week's work. Okay?
I didn't. I just turned on
I stayed up late to grade it, so I expect you to file it, James. You have.
I don't care if she's here or not.
You have a place for notes, vocab. You have a place for the study guide scavenger hunt. if you're turning in something way after the fact, there's a box called late. That's where it goes. And so getting situated on all that stuff, go ahead and
I'm later than the
go ahead
late
and turn to the warm-up question as well.
as well.
And it seems like Omar and Alex, y'all go ahead and take one seat. Fill in the gaps for today.
Report's not here.
Nicole.
She didn't finish this morning, so she didn't come to school.
Hey,
We have a life skills conversation later.
I see that George Washington came back. And
Yes,
apparently,
yes. So Mr. Swanson, he had a dentist appointment. And you know, this thing that you guys call the dentist really amazes me because my wooden dentures, I don't ever have to get them looked at. So Mr. Swanson has to miss a whole day of class just to go to the dentist. But the positive thing there is that we've had a conversation. We did so well together last time. You know, last time I didn't even know that you guys were telling the story of the American Revolution. But this time, Mr. Swanson knew he had to be out for a day, and he said, "Hey, Mr. George, seems like the class and you got along pretty well last time. How about, will you be my substitute again while I have to go to the dentist?" And I said, "Mr. Swanson, that sounds like a great idea. I so enjoyed being with your class, and by chance, are you talking about something that my life would be able to share about?" He said, "Would you believe it or not, we're talking about the first president of the United States. So I do think it'd be a good time for you to come and be my substitute." So today, you may refer to me as Mr. President. Simple title, appropriate for my position. Mr. President will do. All that said, I've given you all the instructions now. Okay, go ahead and get after the warm-up activity so that we can talk about it here in just a second. Yes, young man. In
Well,
front.
I
Actually, in
see,
back.
I see that you're, got new clothes and stuff.
Yes, feeling rather dapper today. You know what the kids say though, drip or drown, and I don't want to drown. It's not new, we've had, here, I'll give you one, but we've had it for a while, we're on number 5 now. You have one like this down, so you can do a different one? So we're on number 5. Those of you that have kept up with it, you have 5 filled in. I have kept up with mine, and I've written down the topic of each journal. I will be taking this up today, since we got through the 5th journal. But for right now, I just want you to do it when we talk about it. Do it when we talk about it. While I take attendance. Tell you what, I've experienced 3 distinctly different classes today. Each of you has your own personality, that's for sure. How was the weekend? While you're working, someone can share with me what they did this weekend.
I was hunting
Hunting and fishing. Did you love every day?
sometimes,
That's what the country boys say.
but, no, I went hunting. I found out I didn't end up with 22 bullets to hunt the squirrels.
Oh,
And then I shot, then I went hunting. We had some,
don't
bird
confess
shot.
any crimes now.
We had some bird shot. So I shot 2 squirrels with a 12 gauge bird shot,
Oh, yeah, two for one, as they say.
and I got one 10 yards away from the tree. I shot them in. They didn't bleed. That was strange.
All right, that's a lot of details.
And
Lexi, do you
then
need a page?
I hurt my collarbone.
How'd you do that?
So apparently because I was moving along with it, and my arm moved,
Oh,
and I had it right here.
that's some rookie stuff right there.
Not
I
really.
thought you were experienced. I
Not-
thought you were,
not
I
with a
thought you were
12
better out in the woods than that.
Not with a 12 gauge. And then I went to work.
Lindy's like, I'm not talking. Last time I did, that didn't work out.
And then I went to work.
I won't
And-
video all the time. It's just Mr. George.
And then I haven't got paid yet.
Okay, Alexia, what you got?
I watched a dog get hit by a motorcycle.
Who was worse off from that situation?
The dog.
Did the motorcycle go down?
It's still intact though. And I played with the Ouija board.
Were you on the motorcycle?
No.
Were you the motorcycle person?
No, I was just walking across the street and
Did
they.
you play the thing?
Okay.
No.
No bad luck.
Cool. Okay, man. When you ask, you get answers. Omar, Alex,
I got stuck under the bed.
you got stuck under the bed.
How did you get stuck under the
I mean,
bed?
Stuck under the bed.
How far back do we have to rewind this story?
Slept over a friend's house. Once she got under the bed, and I was like, stuck.
Okay. Nicole could have used your help today. She's
Yeah.
looking for her shoes.
She
this
looked
morning.
at. She told me she looked in the fridge.
Like a very Nicole thing, very Nicole place to place one's shoes.
Well, now there's the story.
All right, TJ.
I
Hey,
had,
everybody over here chime in.
I had to look after like 40 dogs this weekend.
That's it?
40.
That's it.
Was it at a dog farm?
It
Was
was
it a puppy mill?
my cousin I live with, her older brother's girlfriend. She takes care of dogs and breeds them and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
There was every breed you could possibly think
I
of.
think all you can do is hose them down at that point. Throw some food out there and hose them down. James.
Look, it wasn't last weekend, but I ran over a squirrel. No, I ran over a dog.
Oh, were you on a motorcycle?
No, I was in the
I
truck.
was about to say James, I thought it would have been you.
Well, you probably could have told by how tall or not tall the rider was.
But no, I ran over a
I don't
dog.
think they let James ride a
And
motorcycle. I think
actually,
he's too
I
short for
could.
that.
I could.
A little small.
Oh.
Anyone on this side? Anyone want
And-
to chime in on
And
this
then I
side?
ran
Come
over
on,
that
Omar,
dog.
what did you do?
I almost got mugged.
And
Ed, there
he
There
got
are
over.
8 people in this class. We have, well, and one of whom is missing, her stories have contributed. Like, we got a power-packed 8 people class right now. James, what?
And then after I hit it, he got up again and just walked it off.
I walked out, I walked out, I walked out.
You just make
All right, hey, let's turn to our opening, let's turn to our warm-up. So I want to hear from 3 of you before we move on. Who, and then I'll give you my answer. So the question is, who you trust to give you advice? And I've got some very unique answers across the day so far. Tell me their name, and it may be as simple as, mom, sister, whatever. If you're to give them a title in your life, like director of, minister of, liaison to, whatever, if you give them a title, what would it be? And then most importantly, the reason why. I'm shocked that James is volunteering to go first.
Liam,
Liam,
the title is my friend.
friend.
And why? Because he really needs some advice. He's a complete moron.
Wait, no. He's
you
advising
advise.
you.
Oh, did I think his advice? Because he's a complete moron. And, well,
All right, that's our starting point, and I don't think we go any lower than that. Who else would like to share? Alex,
Black over there.
Man in Black, Omar. Okay, so Omar is your person. What's his title?
Potato.
Director of Potato Grooming, Cropping,
Yeah.
Director of Potato Growing.
Sure.
Okay, he's your Director of Potato Growing. Why? Does he have this deep knowledge of how to grow spuds?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, like that.
He's a potato grower. Okay, all right, that's 2. I need a third. I need one from this side.
Esmeralda, it's your turn.
Ezzy, who do you trust to give you advice? Huh? Fatima. Okay, Fatima's in my first block. She did not say you. Are you going to fight later? I'm just kidding. You trust Fatima to give you advice. What's her title in your life? She's your cousin. But okay, what's her area of expertise though? Like she's the director of. She's good at sports. She's good at
she's good
sports.
at talking.
All right, director of athletics in your life. Why do you trust her to give you advice about athletics? Finally, we kind of got to a key point here. She has more experience than Ezzy. A lot of times the people we let into our lives and let them give us advice, whatever category, whatever title we would give them, they have more experience than us. A lot of times they're older, maybe decades older. They've been through more adventures than we have, so we trust the background that they bring to the conversation. Keep this in mind. We're going to talk about the advisors to George Washington here in just a few minutes. I'll give you my answers now since I'm sure you're wondering. Who do I trust to give me advice? I say my battalion commander. This is Mr. Swanson, not George Washington. Mr. Swanson's battalion commander. That's my boss in my Army life, right? We all have different corners of our life. So my Army life, I trust my boss, my battalion commander. The title I give him is Military Affairs Advisor. See how that's like a fancy title? Kind of conveys that he knows something about the military, because he does. Why? Very similar, as he said. He's got years more experience than I do. I trust him to kind of guide my career. Hey, the next gate that you need to go through is, or if I need a particular school, an Army school, he might advise me on that. Or let's say it's a deployment thing. I'm about to go to Ukraine or the Republic of Georgia or something like that. He's got more experience on deployments than I do. That's why I trust him. Very often we trust people who have more experience in a category than we do. We're going to talk about George Washington's advisors. But first, let's remember where we are so we can talk about where we're going. Now, put your parchment paper away for just a second. Just kind of to the side, because I am going to come back to it as we talk about George Washington's advisors. Here's what's new in front of you. You have, usually it's my class that makes all the noise. In front of you, you have these open-ended notes, which we did this last week as well on the Constitution. Here's the open-ended notes. Now, this is for the whole week. You can see we're going to talk about all 5 of our first 5 presidents. Today, you'd be largely on the front page with George Washington. Okay, this is one style of notes you're taking. And we're leveling up a little this week. All right, we're going to be a little bit more rigorous. We also have the fill in the blank notes. This is a little bit on the simpler side. You know, you're just looking for the key word. Whereas the fill in or the open-ended notes is for you to write down and summarize the conversation we're having about that category. Some students prefer one over the other. This week, I just give you both.
Can we pick which one we want?
You may not. You may do them all. In fact, you may do it all. Okay? I got it. We're here to have another conversation about George Washington. Temperature, good. Like, I'm sweating, so you guys are probably good.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go. Let's remember where we come from. The Dance American Revolution. Anybody ever play that game? DDR, right? Bouncing around on the arrows. You got a Jerry curl bouncing in my face. The Dance American Revolution. Dab it up for me. Everybody, James, do it. Dab it up for me. That's where we come from. 8 years. 8 years of war, leading now into the new republic. And we're going to be in a 2-day conversation about the presidencies of Washington, first president, and Adams, second president. We're not going to memorize the presidents in order, although I think that's a great thing to do. There's some cutesy little songs out there that help you memorize the presidents. But by the time our conversation is over, we're definitely going to be done with what we're going to know about the first 5 presidents. Let's remember where we've come from, okay? We're sitting now in 1790, United States of America. This bold innovation, very often called the American experiment. Even to today, sometimes we wonder, will this experiment survive because of the enormous risk that we had to take in creating it? And as time goes on, bringing it into the present day, sometimes we wonder if it will survive because of the world conditions. 8 years of war, followed by the creation of a brand new government. We've been busy fighting a war, building a new government, and what we have now on our hands is a democracy. In a world run by kings and monarchs, we have this new style of government where you get the people get to vote for, get to choose who their leader will be. And that is what's truly revolutionary about this whole American experiment. Our government is not one king who rules all, but rather 3 branches of government, each with their own power, but each with the ability to check the others. So remind me, what are those 3 branches of government?
Legislation.
Good. Some of y'all said it in the order that I remember as well. LEJ, legislative, executive, judicial. As we talk about presidents, what branch of government are we talking about? Executive. Yeah, the president is called the chief executive, and a lot of people would say it is the president who embodies what is most, the leadership in America. The president embodies leadership of the country. And what's really unique about the 45 men who have held this office is that not a one of them is identical to another. You don't have to have one type of personality. You don't have to have one type of background. We've had 45 men hold the office of President of the United States, and each of them has been very unique and uniquely different from each other. Yes, sir.
Now, if we have a max of 8 years, a term, well, I know a term is 4 years, but if you have a max of 8 years, how do we only have 45 presidents over like 200, over a span of 200 years?
So
I know before we get to sit down.
we're gonna talk about terms here in a second. Bottom line is, if you math it out from George Washington in 1789 to the present, it has been the right amount of terms. We've had one president who's had more than 2 terms. We talked about that. We've had one president who had non-consecutive terms, like he was president and then not president and then president again. That's why we say we've had 46 presidents, but one man, he's the 22nd president and the 24th president. That's a little extra since James asked, okay? But as we dive into talking about the presidency, those are some good questions. Good question, James. Hang in there. I'm going to answer some of those questions about terms as well. Truly revolutionary at a time where most of the world is governed by kings, monarchs. Your bloodline determines whether you get to be a leader. Not your qualities, not your abilities, but whether you were born into the position. So one of the more radical things about this American experiment that nobody has ever done before is having a leader elected by the people. Remember what we've come from. We talked about 13 colonies, now 13 states, different regions. What were those regions? Remind me.
Cold, medium, and hot.
I'm gonna knock this guy out. Regions of the colonies, geographic regions.
Middle colony.
New England,
Southern.
middle, and we all slap on southern. Good. I heard it from several of y'all. Y'all know when we do review, I really just want you to call it out, okay? It's okay if you like talk over someone else because we're all saying the same thing at the same time. New England, middle, and southern. These 13 colonies, now 13 states, reasonably, y'all, it's hard for us to understand because here we are sitting in 2022. Reasonably, they should have been 13 different countries. They should have had their borders should have been national borders, not state borders. So it's amazing that we united under one constitution. This is the setup for us to start talking about the presidency. Remember what we left. What man did we truly declare independence from? King George. We declared independence from a single, all-powerful leader. So a question we have in front of us is, how much power are we going to give to the executive? How much power are we going to give to this one man that we're going to call president? A lot of people early on believe that the president should be a yes man to Congress. Congress is the one who truly holds the power. Congress writes the laws, sends them to a president who should just sign off on them, right? This man, this president is just a figurehead to do the will of Congress. That's what a lot of people believed early on. We are going to find out that this is not how the early presidents operated. And because they expressed their strength and their power, we have the presidency that we have today. But it all starts with a big question. How do we choose the first man? How would you go about choosing the very first president of this new grand experiment?
I would go by the one who had more experience and helped us win the war.
Looking for a man who has a lot of experience and then a very specific attribute, someone who helped us win the war. Who would that man be?
George Washington.
James says George Washington. And James is onto something because that's exactly what these early founding fathers looked for. A man who would be accepted by all, would not cause division, and would be generally unanimously elected, and everyone's in agreement. And that one man, the one person on the face of the planet who kind of met those attributes would be George Washington. Picture of George Washington from the musical Hamilton on the screen in front of us here, yeah. So George Washington, initially, he was very hesitant to offer himself as the president of the country. Guys, that was unheard of. Someone giving away power, saying no to power. A lot of these founding fathers had confidence in George Washington because he had already done that. At the end of the Revolution, a lot of people want to put a crown on that man's head. They said, just like James said, the experience led us through a war. George Washington, be our leader for the rest of your life. No term limits. You don't have to be elected. We want to crown you right now. It's because that's what they knew. They knew leadership of a king. They knew leadership of a monarchy. Not 4-year term limits, but you're the leader for the rest of your life. At that time, George Washington said no. We just fought a war against that. Of course, I'm not going to accept your kingship. So a lot of people believe that because George Washington had already turned away power one time, he was the right man for the job. So that brings us kind of to our notes. Go ahead and turn to your fill-in-the-blank notes. America in 1790. Say a couple more things here that are on your notes after that setup part. Predominantly a rural society. We had the major port cities, Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. They had the industry that comes with them, but predominantly the country was focused on agriculture and growing crops. 80% of households in America were involved in agricultural production. So what region would be dominating as an agricultural society? Southern. Yeah, the southern colonies were set up for growing and economic gain. Of course, initially for England, but now we're missing some. Some of y'all, TJ, it's 2 pages. TJ, there's that. Go ahead, staple this. I don't know what y'all missing. I had them laid out on all. Yes. All right, TJ, you might have shuffled it into your binder because I have them laid out on all desks. All right, we situated? All right, we resituated? Cool. So, southern colonies dominant, 80% of households involved in agriculture. Let's talk about the size of the country. I'll give you this fact, and then we're going to play a guessing game. There were 3 million Americans in the country in 1790. Let's bring that to today. A little guessing game here for you. How many Americans are in this country today? I should say how many people are in this country today. Take a guess. Shout it out.
46 billion.
46 billion. Very large number.
7.8 mil. 7.8 mil.
7.8 mil. Very specific.
A billion.
A billion, just around billion. Couple more guesses. You know what? Everybody take a guess. TJ. I'm coming to everybody.
33 million.
33 million. Alexia. 10 million. Ezzy. 9.5 million. Again, very specific. Lindy. 5 billion. Buck. Billion. Darren. 190 million. And Omar, say yours again.
1 billion.
Oh, you said 1 billion. Who said 7.8? That was you. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, I got you. Alex was like, I told you, don't know the difference between us.
I really don't care.
All right, here's perspective for you. America in 1790, 3 million. The world today, you need to know this. In the world today, there's about 9 billion people. Well, 9 billion. So whoever said 46 billion, that was you. It's way too high. In America today, 330 million. 330 million. 3 million to today, 330 million. That is an exponential growth across time, right? But that's just for perspective. That's why we did that little guessing game. At the time, in the country, there were about 7,500 African Americans, and only about 10% of those were in the North. We call them free non-whites in the North. Okay, that's how I want to say it because I want to include all ethnicities. Free non-whites in the North, about 7,500. 90% of African Americans and non-whites in the country were in the South, and what were they in? Bondage. Yeah, they were in bondage, producing. In the agricultural area of the South, they were on the plantations, participating in the agriculture, in slavery. And let's not lose sight of the fact, right? That's humans in bondage. All right, that's our setup. That's where we are in the country at this time. So let's begin our new government, right? I kind of brought us to this point. Congress convenes March 4th, 1789 to vote for a president. The way it worked at this time was that whoever was first place on the ballot would be president. Whoever was second place on the ballot in the election would be vice president. That's not how it is today. Today they run together. But at the time, first place president, second place vice president. It's going to create some complications with some rivalries. And that's why we're going to do away with that system. Well, nobody runs on the first ballot except for George Washington. Okay, he's elected unanimously, 69 electoral votes. Everybody votes for George Washington. He's the president. Second ballot, there's more than one person, right? Some of these rivals start competing against each other. And the winner of the second ballot is John Adams. He gets 34 of the electoral votes. He becomes vice president. Second place vote getter, he becomes vice president. So now we have our first team: President George Washington, Vice President John Adams, and like I said, unanimously elected because everyone had confidence in George Washington. Just for perspective, the Bill of Rights is adopted by Congress and ratified in 1791. So all this is going on. The Constitution has been ratified, but the Bill of Rights is still out there being voted on by the states. I know we talked about that last week. So there's our man, first president of the United States, George Washington.
There's you.
Here I am. I've done a bad job of talking in first person today. Here I am, George Washington, privileged to be your chief executive. You know what, children? Let me tell you how much I wanted to be president. When I say I wanted to be president, I don't mean that I wanted the power. I mean that I wanted to serve the people. When I arrived for my inauguration in the city of, take a guess.
New Hampshire.
Incorrect.
Virginia.
Incorrect.
Pennsylvania.
Where's the capital of our country?
Oh,
D.C.
Washington.
I fooled you because you're supposed to say Washington, D.C. That's what you know. Our capital at this time was in New York City. Our capital city won't land in Washington, D.C. until much later. Well, I arrived for my inauguration in New York City. In order to get there, I had to take out a loan from a bank. I was not a wealthy man. I did not have so much money that I could just do whatever I wanted. A lot of your politicians today are very independently wealthy, and they can campaign because they have a fortune in the bank. That wasn't me. To get to New York City and to have a little bit of an inauguration party, I had to take out a loan from a bank. So I truly wanted to serve the people of America, so much so that I was willing to go into debt, literally financial debt, so that I could serve the people of the United States. That's how much George Washington wanted to be our first president. Not that he wanted power, but they wanted to serve. James?
Now I guarantee, once the bank found out that he made president, they didn't pay his thing back.
I have a feeling they knew he was president. I think he said, "Hi, I'm George Washington, and I need some money to get to New York City to be inaugurated." All right, here are just some stats on George Washington. Me, here I am. Go to your fill in the blank notes. Okay, right under George Washington. This would be a good place to put that. First part, I think we all know, right? The simplest fact in U.S. history: George Washington is the first president. Elected twice to 2 terms, 1789, 1792. George Washington, I faced, in my presidency, I faced several challenges. In my presidency, I set several precedents. So I'm going to help y'all out. Thank you, Lindy. On this page right here, we're going to talk about challenges. Write them down under challenges. In this page right here, we're going to talk about precedents. Write this under precedents. If you want to write any of that extra, you can do it right under his picture right there. So now that I got y'all on the right track. First president, elected twice, faced several challenges, established several precedents. If that's not a word you understand right now, that's okay, because we're going to talk about it. We'll talk about it. All right, a couple of the challenges we faced, and I am gonna talk about each one of these. So a couple of the challenges I faced included: 1, debt. 2, we're gonna call it the British problem. The British, aren't we done talking about those guys yet? Nope, not yet. And 3, taxation. Taxation. Didn't we fight a war to get away from taxes? Yes, and we're gonna find out that a government can't run without at least some taxation. But I'm George Washington. I wouldn't be a leader if I didn't rise to the challenge of these, rise to some of these challenges. So I say challenge accepted. Now let's talk about each of them. So first of all, debt. The nation was deep in debt. You fight a war, it costs money. We didn't have a single currency, and that was a big problem. We didn't have a national currency. The value of the currency that was in circulation was very low. To raise revenue, my government put out a series of taxes to mixed reception. Not everybody appreciated these taxes. And then a big way that I want to tackle debt is through a national bank. And this national bank idea comes to me from one of my advisors named Alexander Hamilton. So on your fill in the blank notes now, we're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton, how do you know Alexander Hamilton?
as the person who created the Broadway musical.
The Broadway musical is what I was looking for. Yeah, Alexander Hamilton to you all is probably the main figure in a hit Broadway musical. And he is the central figure in that musical. So I appreciate that the musical has kind of brought Alexander Hamilton back into the conversation on a national level. Here's the thing about that musical. It is not entirely historically accurate. Just like if you watch any movie, you got to be careful with what they're saying is history. Musical, catchy songs, cool costumes, dancing, all that kind of stuff, it's not always accurate to history. Some of it is, and it's good for listening and learning. Some of it's not, and we just got to know that it's entertainment. So I like the musical, but you just got to know it's not entirely true to history. Here's a little bit about Alexander Hamilton. I'm going to tell you specifically how he relates to the National Bank. He was a Federalist, right? He was the Federalist of Federalists. What did the Federalists, what did they want in terms of the Constitution? No,
They wanted to tell you to sign them.
not the Bill of Rights. The
Just
Federalists
said that.
liked the Constitution as it was written. They wanted it to be passed as it currently was, which talked about a strong national government. The opposite of them, what is the opposite party?
Anti.
Anti-Federalists, they demanded a Bill of Rights be written. So I know those words. Federalists, anti-Federalists, I know, they're very similar words. But it's the anti that wanted the Bill of Rights. So Alexander Hamilton, he's like Federalist of Federalists. He's the leader of the Federalists, and he wrote most of the Federalist Papers. Well, in Washington's government, in my government, he was my Secretary of the Treasury. And we're going to talk about like your opening activity. We talked about people that give you advice. Alexander Hamilton gave me advice on the economy. We're going to talk about all my advisors here in just a second. Well, Alexander Hamilton, he says this about our finances. He says, since we all fought the war on behalf of independence together, we should all share in debt. And that may make sense on the surface because, we're all in this together, but here's where it's complicated. Northern states were in debt. Northern states had not yet paid off their debt. Southern states, on the other hand, they were more responsible with their finances and they already paid off their debt. Let me try to make an example here in the classroom. Do I have TJ's in band? Used to be. Do I have another band member? Can I go with the band example? Cool, I got 2 used to be banders. All right, well, let's say it's the beginning of the school year, beginning of the band season, and y'all gotta buy t-shirts. TJ pays his $20 for a band t-shirt, right? On time, paid my debt. I'm already done. I don't owe anything else. I paid for my t-shirt. James, on the other hand, lollygags. He has a job, but he spends his money on all sorts of other stuff. James still owes $20. James has not paid his debt. When all of a sudden, because there's several Jameses out there, okay, there's several people who still owe money. Mr. Garrett, band director, he says, you know what? We're just going to consolidate all our debt. Everybody who owed t-shirt money, we're going to split it by the number of people that are in band, and it's going to be a little bit less for everybody. Are we good with that? TJ, what's your response to that?
No.
No, because why?
Because I already paid my money.
Because he already paid his debt. TJ, you're the southern states. You've already paid your war debt. James, you're the northern states. You have not paid your war debt. You would love for TJ to share your debt. But TJ, your response? I paid my debt. You get that example a little bit, right? TJ doesn't want to pay extra, whereas James is like, yeah, how about it, right? We all share this together. We're all in this together. James?
Can I get switched to southern states? I don't like the cold.
I just picked you as the northerner because I figured I'd get a response out of you. That's the example, all right? That's what Alexander Hamilton proposed. Now, he was on to one thing. He said, hey, if we all share debts, that's going to increase our nationalism because we're all in this together. But just like in the band example, it's also going to cause a divide. Those who've already paid versus those who haven't paid, and not everybody's going to get along because of that. So here's your last statement. Controversy. Most of that debt was held by Northerners. Therefore, most of the debt was held by Northerners. They were for the plan. However, sharing that debt did not seem to be fair to the Southerners. They were not in favor of that plan. So here we have Alexander Hamilton. Some people love him. Some people hate him. And that's just kind of a personality that he was a divisive figure in all that he did, a polarizing figure in all that he did. James is bumping, fourth block bumping. What? All right, a little bit more about the national bank. So Hamilton and the national bank, he wanted a bank that, here's a positive, it could print a national currency. If we have a national bank, we can have one currency for our whole country. To this day, I bet Alexander Hamilton is in this room right now. Does anybody have a $10 bill in your pocket? If anybody,
I got it on my card.
if anybody's holding a $10 bill, you have a picture of Alexander Hamilton in your pocket right now.
You got one?
Because I don't think I do. I really don't think I do. I got a 20.
Hang on.
Alexander Hamilton is on the $10 bill. And I'll be honest with you guys, a lot of times we don't know, a lot of times we know who's on the 1, who's on the 5, who's on the 20, but you don't know who's on the 10. Alexander Hamilton is on the $10 bill.
I know who's on the $1 bill.
Who's on the 20?
The 20 is Jefferson.
Jackson.
Who's on the one?
George Washington.
I have you in my pocket.
Got you in my pocket. All right, we can print currency. It's a national currency, and that's why Alexander Hamilton's on the $10 bill. It's also good for the economy. Okay, we're growing as an economy. If we have one national bank, we're going to be able to keep the economy going in the same direction. And finally, a lot of people were wondering if we're even allowed to make a national bank. Let me explain Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 1 says, anything not written in this paper that might be necessary to government can be created by the government. It's called the Necessary and Proper Clause. Think about it. The people who wrote this paper, my replica here, the people who wrote this paper, could they think about everything that was coming in the future? Could they think about the advent of automatic weapons, missiles, nuclear bombs?
Yep.
Could they think about the internet?
Yep.
Rocket ships? Right, I'm just coming up with a bunch of examples of things they couldn't possibly think
How
of.
about TV?
So Article 1 in the Constitution says, if it's necessary and proper for government, it can be created. Alexander Hamilton says, hey, even though it's not in the Constitution, a bank is necessary, so it can be created. That's his thinking as it relates to the Constitution. Not everybody agrees with him. What type of person would be opposed to Alexander Hamilton?
George Washington.
The Anti-Federalists?
Anti-Federalists, yes. And who's the leader of the
George
Anti-Federalists?
Washington.
Thomas Jefferson, yes. So we got some key players here. Alexander Hamilton, founding father. Thomas Jefferson, founding father. They just have different opinions. Jefferson opposes the national bank. He argues that the bank does not fall under necessary and proper. He says you don't need it, and therefore you're stretching the Constitution if you create it. James Madison and other anti-federalists, okay, so there's a group of them, oppose the creation of the national bank. They say that it's unconstitutional. In the end, a vote is taken. Northern representatives vote overwhelmingly for the bank because their debt is going to get shared. Southern representatives vote overwhelmingly against the bank because their debt has already been paid off. The total vote, if you do math on that, is 39-20 for the bank, and therefore the bank is created. So the Northerners get what they want. The Southerners don't really appreciate it because their debts have already been paid, but now they got to pay more money. And it leads to this question of whether the Constitution should be strictly interpreted or broadly interpreted. A strict view says that you can only do what's in the Constitution. If it's not on this sheet of paper, you can't create it. We signed this sheet of paper, you can't make up other stuff. That's a strict view of the Constitution. A broad view of the Constitution is that you can do whatever is necessary for the government to do.
No.
And it's those people who take a broad view come up with all those what ifs that I took you through: space travel, automatic weapons, nuclear warfare, etc. Right? The founding fathers couldn't predict all of that, so hey, we got to do what is necessary across the centuries as our country continues to exist. Big governmental question highlighted in the issue of the national bank. Okay, moving on a little bit more. Then let's. What's the verdict on the national bank? If you were me,
George
if you were me, You got Hamilton advising you in your left ear. You got Jefferson chirping at you in your right ear. You've heard the arguments of both sides. You or me? James, what do you decide? What do you decide?
Can I be okay?
If you or me, what do you decide?
If these people over here, shut up.
So, am I for or against the National Bank?
Against.
I'm against the National Bank.
Yes.
Oh, okay, because I told the people to shut up.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm not sure that's me, but anyone else? Anyone else want to say something different? TJ, what you got?
I would really and truly be for the National Bank because just in my mind, in theory, it would even everything out to a point, so that half the country isn't in debt the entire time,
Okay.
the other half is thriving.
Even as a Southern colony, you're gonna pay a little more than your fair share, so that we have some evenness.
If it doesn't break what we've just spent a war fighting, yeah.
Okay, so
I like
you
that
do that,
thought,
but you
TJ.
won't pay for my
All right,
t-shirt.
here's the verdict. Washington agrees with Hamilton, and he says that the government does have the right to create something that's necessary, even if it's not clearly defined in the Constitution. So therefore, the National Bank is created. One of the large critiques was that it was going to be too powerful and that the average man was going to have too much of his income taken away. That really doesn't shake out to be the case. The National Bank is largely financed by private donors and private investors, and it's not quite as problematic as it may have sounded to someone who is concerned about their finances. So we're not going to dive into too much of the economic theory of the National Bank. This is as much as I'm going to tell you about the history of the National Bank. George Washington, interestingly, right, as I asked you that question, which side would he be on? George Washington was not a part of either party. He would not say, I am a Federalist, I am an anti-Federalist. He would listen to both sides and make a balanced judgment. One of his big things was that we should not have parties at all. So he would not have agreed with being on one side or the other. He just wanted to make the best decision for America. In this case, he agrees with Alexander Hamilton. Let's round out Alexander Hamilton and we'll take our break. Alexander Hamilton's legacy. So lifelong legacy, his achievements are,
Next page.
So this is on your fill in the blank notes, his legacy and his weaknesses, as well as, I should have pointed this out earlier, it's fine. He's on your open notes as well. And this is good because I want you to put it in your own words, so you can just go back and summarize Alexander Hamilton later. Here's the summary of Alexander Hamilton. Achievements. 1, he enhanced the value of the dollar. He did. As much as people may not have liked the bank, he did give us a national currency that made our dollar more valuable. He secured the government's credit. Through the National Bank, we started doing business with other countries. We lended with France and Spain and others. So that puts us on the world stage doing business with other countries. That is also foreign capital, secured foreign capital by doing business with other countries. And overall, you may not like the bank, you may think it's big government, you may think it's only for rich people, but our country did begin to flourish, financially successful. So Alexander Hamilton, positive legacy in that regard. Here's some of his weaknesses and maybe some of the negative side of his legacy. 1, he was an elitist. Okay, he was a rich guy. He was a northerner who was involved in business. He has never really understood farming, agriculture, or the frontier. So he never really was able to connect with farmers, frontiersmen, backwoodsmen. So that's one of his negatives, is that he was elite, wealthy, and unable to connect with commoners. And that pretty much fits the Federalist Party, right? He is the chief Federalist, and his attributes follow what most Federalists believe in that regard. Not exactly what I'm talking about here today, but Alexander Hamilton has a very unceremonious end to his life and to his story. Does anybody know the unfortunate demise of Alexander Hamilton?
Shut.
He was shot by whom? It's pretty spicy, pretty racy. the Vice President of the United States.
Vice President of the United
He
States.
was shot by Aaron Burr, the third sitting Vice President of the United
Third
States.
sitting Vice President.
It was called murder, okay? Even though they were dueling and they were in the agreement to be dueling over some personal slight, it was murder. You were not allowed to duel even in 1806. And that is a major part of, well, that's the ending of his story. Some people say that he threw away his shot, kind of on a moral ground. I am opposed to dueling and I will not shoot in your direction. Some people say he just missed. I'll tell you what Aaron Burr didn't do, miss. Aaron Burr shot at Alexander Hamilton, hit him in the torso. He dies about 18 hours later. This is the tragic end to the man, the myth, the legend, Alexander Hamilton, and that is what the musical largely explores as well. So, perfect little pause point. Let's take our break. Come back. We're still talking challenges. Challenges.
Hey, a cold in here.
I can't be sleepy when I'm cold. I be sleepy when I'm hot. right, let's get to the finish line here. Challenge number 2, the British problem. Challenge number 2, the British problem. I got 2, maybe 3 videos I want to show you at the end of our day here, so let's go ahead and get through this so we can get to the videos. British problem. Wouldn't you think that we won the war and we're done with them?
Totally not.
Would you think that?
No, they didn't come
Totally not is a good way to put that. After the war, the British still wouldn't leave us alone. Here's what they were doing. This is not on your notes. The next screen is. Here's what they were doing. They were seizing U.S. ships at sea, right? They had the more powerful Navy. Us, we had a weak Navy, and our merchant ships didn't have much way to protect themselves. So the British would sail right up alongside us. They'd board our ships. And you know what they would do? The sailors on our ships, they would say, you're a British citizen. You were born British. You're now in the British Navy. You woke up an American, then you got seized by the British, and you got thrown into the British Navy. That's not very cool, right? So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that the land we gained from the Treaty of Paris. What were the 2 boundaries from this to that?
Mississippi to the Appalachian Mountains.
That's right. From the Appalachians to the Mississippi, this amount of land right here. Well, the British had a lot of forts out there, and even though they signed the treaty, they weren't leaving the forts. They stayed in the forts in our territory, right? Because of the treaty, it was now our territory. So that's problem number 2. And problem number 3, also a part of the treaty, I'll get you in a second, also a part of the treaty, they agreed to repay us financially for damaged crops, damaged countryside, stolen slaves, right? Because slaves were property, unfortunately. Well, they had not done that. They had not made any financial repayments from after the war either. James, question?
Okay, so if I did get seized and woke up American and had been thrown in the Navy, well, one, I would go to the Navy, and after some time I work my way up in the ranks, and then I'll take the ship and go on my patrol, then just land over there in the Americas.
You know what the real L in that whole situation is, though? You're in the Navy.
Okay.
You still gotta serve.
Be Navy. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I like your thinking, James. I like your thinking. All right, so these are 3 problems. Hey, check it out. We're our own country now, right? We are on the world stage as an independent country. We can't get bullied around by our former empire. So we're going to have to do something about it. If you were me, if you were George Washington, what would you do about this?
Diplomacy until it doesn't work.
I would stop worrying about our taxation and all that and help and try to build up our Navy.
Okay, I'll hear that. TJ, what'd you say?
Me personally, I would try to do it in a diplomatic situation at first. If that didn't work, maybe we'd have to start getting forceful with it.
I like TJ's side. He said diplomacy first, and I'm not going to take it off the table, but force later. Okay, I don't want to go straight to force. Diplomacy first.
I go straight
TJ, you're onto something. That's exactly what I do. That's exactly what George Washington does. A man named John Jay, he's a diplomat. He's a future Supreme Court justice. John Jay is sent to England to negotiate on these 3 categories. British, you will stop seizing U.S. ships, vacate forts on the frontier. That means leave them. Leave the forts on the frontier. And 3, repay for stolen crops and slaves, just like you said you would. Right? 3 problems, 3 negotiations. How do you think this diplomatic effort went? TJ, I'll ask you since you brought it up.
Because it's England, probably not. Yeah.
I like TJ's line of thought, right? We've hung out with the British for about 2.5 weeks now. We've studied them enough to know that they're going to keep on being bullies. That's exactly right. Now, John Jay comes back from England with this information. He couldn't text it. He couldn't phone call. He had to sail across the ocean. And the report he brought us is that the British agreed to only one of these. They agreed to leave the forts on the frontier, finally, but they don't agree to the rest of it. That's the treaty he brings back to us. Largely seen as a failure, largely seen as a very weak treaty. On your notes, it says how many did they agree to? They only agreed to 1. They only agreed to 1 of the 3 big negotiating topics. And it is seen, because of that, it is seen as a weak treaty. Now, I could wish that he did better. John Jay, man, like you got punked over there. I wish you negotiated stronger. Or, in the interest of finding some peace, what do you think I did? Me, George Washington. What, TJ, we'll just keep going with you. What would you do if you were me now? John Jay comes back with a pretty weak sauce treaty, but he did negotiate at least one of the terms. What are you gonna do?
I would put a pin in it for right then.
I like that. When you say put a pin in it, what do you mean by that?
Like, okay, they agreed to one clause. We'll just have to keep trying until something breaks.
I like what TJ said. Put a pin in it, right? We're gonna pause at that point. That's exactly right. So the treaty is not accepted very well in America. A lot of people are angry about it. But I, as the leader, I gotta make a decision. I accept it. I sign it. We're gonna get the British to leave the frontier, at least. And we're just gonna kind of have to maintain, we're gonna have to keep observing the other issues. We might never get paid. And the impressment thing, I want you to pay attention to the sailors thing. James, you seem to have some energy about getting seized as a sailor. Pay attention. Remember that one, because we're gonna talk about sailors being seized here in just a couple days again. So TJ, by me saying again, you can think that it didn't get resolved until later. Do I see a question? A half hand? Question? No, a whole hand?
The Navy's better than the Army.
Navy is not better than the Army, and I'll fight you about that.
It
if I have
is.
to.
It
All right.
really is.
Here's our third issue. Our third issue was related to taxation. And this is going to be called the Whiskey Rebellion. And I always like to say, what a cool thing to rebel against. Whiskey, right?
No.
No. This is a domestic issue. Okay, domestic means at home. The British issue, that was an international issue, but domestic means at home. This is a domestic issue. And it stems from a tax that Alexander Hamilton recommended to me in 1791, a tax on whiskey. Whiskey was being made by grain farmers. They would first harvest their grain, and that was their cash crop. But with their excess grain, they would make distilled spirits, aka liquor. Liquor, primarily whiskey. So we levy a tax on distilled spirits, primarily liquor, and this hits people where it hurts. Where do people hate to get hit?
The face.
The pocketbook, the wallet, right? People hate to get hit in the pocketbook. For these farmers, grain was not their main moneymaker. Whiskey was their main moneymaker. So the tax on whiskey really made them angry. Summer of 1794, we're at a boiling point, and we have a full-on revolt in Western Pennsylvania. What happens here is that these frontiersmen start attacking American tax collectors. And this is where we truly see history repeat itself. Last time we talked about tax collectors, they were British, but what was happening to them?
They got tarred and feathered.
Tarred, feathered, strung up, tied, detained, abused. Those by some terrorists who we called
The Sons of Liberty.
the Sons of Liberty. That's the last time we talked about tax collectors. Well, this time we're talking about American citizen tax collectors going around collecting the tax on whiskey that I signed into law. How are these tax collectors being treated by these Western Pennsylvania frontiersmen?
Horrible.
The exact same way. It's like deja vu all over again. Tarred, feathered, tied up, strung up, bound, abused. It's like we're doing the same thing. But this time it's not to British citizens, it's to our own, right? Our own tax collectors. So I have to set an example. I have to do something to put down this revolt. There was more than just abuse of the tax collectors. There were gun battles. There was a militia standing up in Western Pennsylvania, and there was a lack of law and order, an overall lack of law and order in Western Pennsylvania. The last time that there was a rebellion of some sort, what was the federal government able to do about it? Do you remember that rebellion? Remember my boy Shays, Daniel Shays? How was the federal government at the time able to deal with Daniel Shays?
Not at all.
Yeah, not at all is the right good way to put it. Under what government was that?
The British.
No. Articles of Confederation. That's right. So I'm trying to review you here. The last time there was a rebellion, it was not under the Constitution, it was under the Articles of Confederation. And a weak national government was not able to put it down. It stopped eventually, but it wasn't because of the national government. So it revealed the weaknesses of the Articles. Well, this is the first time that there's a revolt under the Constitution. In my own country, can I stand for that?
Yes.
No.
Answer is no, of course I can't. I have to show the strength of the federal government. So what I do, we have a very small army at the time. I request for volunteer militia from neighboring states. The governors of New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia send me about 13,000 troops. Now I have a sizable force. The Whiskey Rebels, we started marching towards western Pennsylvania. As soon as the Whiskey Rebels heard that we were coming, what do you think they did?
They ran.
Dispersed to the countryside. Yeah, TJ put his hand
They
up.
scattered.
Do you know why?
They were scared.
I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but it's because they heard George Washington was leading this army.
No.
Many of them were veterans, right? Many of them were veterans from the war, and they had an honest gripe about taxes, right? They're saying, hey, didn't we fight this war against taxes? I hear what they're saying. But as soon as they heard that their old general, George Washington, was leading this army towards them, two things. One, out of respect, they stood down. And two, the federal government demonstrated its strength that we could put down a rebellion. So this is a picture of George Washington leading his army. Interesting little side here is that George Washington, me, to this day, the only president to lead troops in battle while being president. The president gives orders to the military all the time, but no other president has ever led troops in battle except for me during the Whiskey Rebellion. And
You look small.
I look small. I was very tall for my time. I think I was 6 feet 0 inches. I'm on my tiptoes right now. George Washington was very tall for his time. So this is the Whiskey Rebellion. This is the tax issue. So hey, I see some snoozy folks. Is my voice just so melodic to you,
sure is.
Alexia? I've also, right? I'm trying to do the opposite of put you to sleep. I'm trying to help you be interested as I tell my story here, okay? Remember, history is just a lot of stories put together. Hang with me. This summarizes the challenges. Debt, thus we have the National Bank. The British problem, thus we have Jay's Treaty. And taxation, we have whiskey taxes, and that leads to the Whiskey Rebellion. So these are challenges that I had to deal with as president. Other half here, let's get to the finish line, is precedence. What is a precedent?
To be honest, I have no idea.
To be honest, that's a fair answer.
Something that happens
Something that happens, yeah, something that happens when?
when you're president.
Something that, why do you say the word before? Because it's pre, I like that. A precedent is something that happens first. It is the very first action taken by a president that is followed by all other presidents. Being the first president of the United States, everything I did was a precedent. People were looking at me all the time to see how a president should behave. I receive an invitation to dinner from the French Prime Minister. Do I accept it?
Yes.
If I accept it, I'm setting a precedent. Now I have to accept all dinner invitations. Should a president go to funerals? Is that a right place for a president to be? Is it dignified? Is that where the chief executive should go? Whatever I decide, anything I do while I'm president, I am setting a precedent because I'm the first to do it. So here's the definition. Actions that were taken, followed by future presidents. And guess what? Precedents can still be set. Presidents today can do something that is followed by future presidents. So precedents are still being set. I'm not the only precedent setter. Other presidents are going to set precedents as well. So important word. We're going to talk about it a lot for the rest of our class. It's not a president. I'm a president. It's a precedent, something that happens first and is followed by others. So let's look at some of the precedents I set. First of all, I accept the very modest title of Mr. President. A lot of people thought that the position of the president should get a very regal title. His Royal Majesty, Most Excellent Lordship, George Washington. I said, no. Didn't we fight a war against royalty? Now, early on, some people called me His Excellency, and that is because that is the title I carried from the Army. His Excellency was an appropriate term for a general. But eventually I said, you know what? Just call me Mr. President, right? And that's how I introduced myself to you today, Mr. President. You may just call me Mr. President, right? Today, in a room right now, someone is referring to Joe Biden as Mr. President.
whether it's a military leader or a citizen or a congressman, right? The appropriate way to refer to the president to this day is just Mr. President. Not regal, not royal, not excellency, just Mr. President. So that's a precedent he said that is still true to this day. James?
Now, I just noticed this, but when you said Joe Biden, he rolled his eyes.
Next precedent, and this kind of gets to our opening activity. George Washington, I formed a cabinet of my close advisors. Our opening activity, I asked you, who do you trust to give you advice? And you guys gave me a couple of answers. I gave you Mr. Swanson's answer, right? His army boss. Well, George Washington brought several brilliant people around him so that he could make good decisions. When I say cabinet, I'm not talking about plates and cups, right? It's not where you store your stuff in the kitchen. A cabinet, in this sense, is a collection of close advisors. Do I see a hand? Yes. So on that box, okay, it's the 4-chart box, precedents set by Washington. 4 of them. I think I got 4 of them coming at you. So pick all 4 of them. I know you're dealing with 2 pages today, and that's fine. You guys are mentally flexible individuals. That's right. Close cabinet of advisors. It's not a cabinet of plates and cups. It's a collection of people. Here is George Washington's original cabinet. Before I show you that, let me ask you, James, if you're going to surround yourself with some close advisors, how many close advisors do you think is a good number? How many? 10? 5? Any other votes? 4? 3? We're just going down now.
At least 2.
At least 2. I like that statement, right? At least 2. Because if it's one person, you're just kind of getting one opinion, right? Okay. George Washington's original cabinet was 4 members. This picture, it's him and 4 others. Here's his cabinet. Henry Knox, Secretary of War. Military, right? Giving him advice on the military. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, giving him advice on what?
Money.
The economy, right? Money and the economy. Next to him, sitting down, Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. Secretary of State deals with other nations. So that's foreign policy. And then finally, on the right-hand side, Edmund Randolph, he's the Attorney General. What's the Attorney General deal with?
Attorney.
The law, right? Law and order, crime and punishment. That's the Attorney General. This is the original cabinet. TJ?
Now that you explained that, I can see why that's a smarter idea. But in my opinion, I just thought of this whenever you would stop answering people. I would have a cabinet of 13.
Okay. Why?
1 from each colony.
I would say that's Congress, right? Congress is given representation. But that TJ, it's a great thought. I love your thinking, right? You're onto something, and I appreciate you thinking versus just sitting there and taking what I have to say. Good thought, TJ. This is the original cabinet. It's 5, or rather, it's just 4 members. The president still has a cabinet today. James, roll your eyes if you want. Joe Biden still has a cabinet today. How many people are in Joe Biden's cabinet?
To be honest, I don't keep up with him because he's a complete lunatic.
25.
Nobody better sue me for that one.
All right,
So-
just listen. Let's stay in the lane. Okay, keep it appropriate. Here's Joe Biden's cabinet. He's got 16 members of his cabinet, and this row is called cabinet level, even though they're not in the cabinet. Point is, a lot. Okay, we went from 4 advisors to a lot of advisors. Some of it's necessary. Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Transportation. But sometimes it feels like too many cooks in the soup, right? If you get too many voices in your ear, now you don't even know what to listen to anymore, James.
He needs all those.
Huh?
He's too stupid to comprehend anymore.
Okay, so hey, just easy on our current president. All right, I'm teaching you history. I'm not asking for your opinion necessarily. Capiche? Capiche? All right. Inside the cabinet, do you think you have 100% harmony all the time?
No.
Absolutely.
Of course not, because I can't get y'all to agree to something. You're just 8 high school students. These are 16, high-level professionals. Of course, they're going to have differing opinions. Take it back to George Washington's cabinet. You got Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson, the Anti-Federalist, sitting right next to each other. George Washington did that on purpose. He said, I don't want a bunch of yes men. I don't want someone just nodding along to everything I say. I want some guys that are going to stand up, give me their opinion, and help me make the best decision possible. And y'all, young people, I give this to you for life, okay? Surround yourself by people who are going to be honest with you, going to give you an alternate opinion, not just give you what you want to hear. You need advisors in your life. I need advisors in my life. And this is one of George Washington's established precedents, having a cabinet in government. All right, moving on. The next precedent, another precedent, he delivered the State of the Union address. Somebody tell me, what is the State of the Union address? How often does it happen?
3 times a month.
Incorrect.
Every year. The inauguration.
Once a year. The answer is once a year, usually in January or February. Okay, it's one of those 2 months. And what it is the president delivering a status report to Congress. How are we doing? What's the state of our union? What's the condition of our union? Originally, it was a written report, right? It just gets dropped off at Congress. Here's the state of our union, right? A written report. These days, it's a made-for-TV event. And I showed you this right here. This is when the president stands before Congress. It's a joint session of Congress, the House and the Senate. They come together. They do a lot of clapping, right? Sometimes they all clap, yay for everybody. Sometimes only the Republicans clap or only the Democrats clap, right? If it's a political type of thing. These days, it's a very political thing. Not necessarily a unity thing, but a political thing. President Biden, he delivers his State of the Union speech in January or February. He's only done one because he did it this year, 2022. He'll do another one in 2023. The president does it every single year. George Washington established the precedent of the State of the Union. What do you need, Frank? Hold on a second. Next precedent, super important, arguably the most important precedent he established was not how he exercised his power, but by how he gave it up. And he willingly stepped down after 2 terms. 2 4-year terms, that's 8 years of service. And George Washington said, that's enough. The Constitution didn't say he had to step down. In fact, a lot of people didn't want him to step down. They wanted him to keep being their leader for the rest of his life. But George Washington said, knowing that people were watching him, George Washington said, 2 years is enough. 2 terms is enough. 8 years is enough. I'm stepping down. Did other how many other presidents followed this precedent?
All but
Every one of them but one. Do we know the president that violated it?
FDR.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, he was president in the 1930s and 40s. He was elected 4 times. Good afternoon. Come on in. I'm speaking of myself, George Washington. And we're talking about Ms. Williams. We're talking about how arguably the most important precedent George Washington established is not how he exercised his power, but by how he relinquished it. And tell me, he served how many terms?
2.
Yep, show off a little bit. Ms. Williams just stepped in. 2 terms. And we just came through the conversation of how many presidents followed this after him.
All but one.
All but one. And who was that president? Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Look at y'all being all smart. How many terms did we have?
I was right on that.
3.
Well, he died during his 4th.
That's right.
He served a full 3 and had just been elected, inaugurated, and he died in his 4th. We will speak of him as we talk about World War II. So I like to showing you, right? I told you what George Washington did was precedent setting, but that doesn't mean everybody agreed to everything he did. Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a decision that broke precedent. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, okay? The people elected him. He was not crowning himself as a king. He did not overthrow the military. He just broke precedent. That's okay. Now, I will get to this. Today, the president can only serve 2 terms because we made it law. 1953, the 22nd Amendment was passed. It's a little bit extra for you. And today, the president can, by law, can only serve two terms. So I do think it's easy to remember 2 terms, 22nd Amendment. Not a big one that we're going to focus on, but it is kind of easy to remember. So major importance is how he gave up his power. He stepped down willingly. Listen, young people, hear me on this. For the time period, Nobody did that. Kings were king for life. Rulers were overthrown by force. It was unheard of for someone at the peak of power to willingly give it up. And he knew how important that was. People were watching. And that is probably the most important thing that anyone's ever done in our government. George Washington stepping down after 2 terms. When he stepped down, he gives a farewell address. And we're going to go over the 4 points of his farewell address real quick, because his final statement of, listen to me, guys, this is the last time I'm going to speak to you as your president. Here's a couple things I want you to hear. Let's get past this one and get to his farewell address. Washington's farewell address. I know I'm racing to the finish line here, okay? He asked for unity. Unity over regional loyalty. Northerners, Southerners, however you identify, be an American. Let's identify as American versus your regional loyalty. Some people heard that. Some people followed. But if you fast forward your brain a little bit, you also know we're going to fight a war between North and South. So not everybody listened to Washington's call for unity. That's the first big thing he says. Second, he advocates for neutrality. Do not get involved in foreign entanglements. That's saying don't get involved in the wars of Europe. At this time, France and England were beginning to fight each other in Europe. Some people thought we should support France because they supported us. Some people thought that, hey, England is a really important trade partner and we don't want to lose them. Even though we fought against them, we don't want to lose their trade. Maybe we should support them. Washington says, let Europe's problems be Europe's problems. Neutrality. We're not for or against either of them. We're not breaking trade with either of them. We're just neutral. We don't have enough money to get involved in a war. We don't have a strong enough military to get involved in a war. Be neutral. Next, he says he believed that a good government is based on religion and morality. We know George Washington to be a man of faith. We looked at the picture of him praying at Valley Forge, and even if that portrait wasn't quite true to reality, we know that he wrote about prayer. He wrote about scripture. He wrote about the divine. So we know George Washington was a believer in the Bible, the scripture, Christian man. He believed government should be based off of good morality and a true religion. And then finally, he warned against political parties. Like when I say that not everything George Washington said was believed by all people, this was one of the first things thrown out with the bathwater. George Washington says, please, I'm warning you against the divisions of being on one side versus the other side and fighting. How did this one go over? Like, did people listen to him on this one?
Nope.
Yeah, pretty immediately we're going to see a rise in political parties, even inside of his own cabinet. So just because George Washington said it doesn't mean it's something that was totally followed by everybody. Political parties being one of the first things to kind of get ignored in his farewell address. TJ?
In my opinion, that's one of the most crucial things that I think the nation should have listened to.
Yeah. So super ironically, in that vein, every year on George Washington's birthday, which is February 22nd, our Congress, it's your sister's birthday? She's right there with George Washington. George Washington's farewell address is read to Congress. Don't pack up on me. Pay attention. George Washington's farewell address is read to Congress. And in a kind of a cool way, getting after that no political parties thing, they trade off who reads it each year. One year it's a Republican, the next year a Democrat, and trading off like that. So this gentleman, I think this is from 2018, he read all of George Washington's farewell address. And I can only hope that the congressmen and the senators, they sit and they listen. And even though we've broken some of the things like neutrality and like political parties, even though we've broken some of what George Washington said, I hope we listen and we decide, maybe they're inspired every year that they hear it. Maybe they change just a little bit whenever they hear George Washington's farewell address. So you're tidy on your notes for right now, but I got a couple of cool extra pictures. Just hang in there with me. This is a bust of George Washington's face. A bust means from your shoulders up. And this was done in 1785, so while he was still alive. And George Washington's granddaughter says, this is the best representation of General Washington that I have ever seen. In a time period that we didn't have cameras, this is the best we have for like what does a person really look like. We don't have a camera. But if George Washington's granddaughter says that this is the best representation of his face, I'm going to go with it. So I kind of believe that this is what George Washington actually looked like. Today, modern, kind of fun, playing with CGI, computers, whatever, a lot of people try to recreate what he might have looked like if he was a politician today. Suit and tie, the face is kind of based off of the bust there. I think that might be what he would look like with a modern hairstyle. This one tries a little bit as well. I think he looks a little bit more elderly in this picture right here. This is a statue that is in the Virginia State Capitol. It's his full body, as you can see. And Marquis de Lafayette, when he was coming through the country in 1820, come on in, we're talking statues again. He was coming through, Marquis de Lafayette was doing his nationwide tour in 1820. He said, here's the quote, "That is the man himself." So if Marquis de Lafayette agrees that that's what George Washington looked like, I'm going to say that's what George Washington looked like as well. Me, military guy, I think it's kind of cool to think what he would look like as a modern military man. 4-star general with a modern haircut. And then this one, same thing. That face is based off of that sculpture, but with a modern haircut and a modern military uniform overall. So just kind of a fun way to end up talking about George Washington. What we're going to do now, and I know exactly what time it is. I know we're coming on the edge of dismissal. I'm going to show you a scene from Hamilton. It is a song called One Last Time, and it is basically George Washington's farewell address. Now, some of the language is not quotes because it's set to music, but there is a portion where they recite verbatim from the farewell address. So all I'm asking you to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. It's pretty catchy music, too. Mia, what's up? What you need?
I need you to sign this for tomorrow.
All right, gladly. Oh, you got a field trip? All right, it's coming up right here. James, you want to hit the lights?
Mr. President, you asked to stand. No, you're busy. What are you gonna need, sir? I want to give you a word of warning. Sir, I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it. Thomas Jefferson resigned.
Should be good.
You're kidding.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I need a favor. Whatever you say, sir. Jefferson will pay for his behavior. Oh, well, use the press, all right, under a pseudonym. You'll see what I can do to him. I need you to drive in a dress. He resigned. You can finally speak your mind. No. Stepping down so he can run for president. Good luck defeating you, sir. I'm stepping down. I'm not running for president. Sorry, what?
Excuse me, what?
One last time. Relax, have a drink with me. One last time. Let's take a break tonight, cause it will teach you how to say goodbye. To say goodbye, you and I. Oh, sir, I want to talk about neutrality, sir. With Britain and France on the verge of war, is this the best? I want to go against partisan fighting. Pick up a pen, start writing. I want to talk about what I have learned, the hard-won wisdom I have earned. As far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve. No, one last time. The people here for me. One last time.
That's George Washington, if you haven't caught that.
Get this right. We're going to teach you how to say goodbye. You and I. If you say you're big old, they will see we're strong. So I'll use it to move them along. You have to say goodbye. If I say goodbye, the nation will move on. Let's see where I'm going. Scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree. No one shall make them afraid. Be safe in the nation we made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree. Moment alone in the shade.
Weird.
This nation we made.
This is actual language from the farewell address.
Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error. I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I should also carry with me the hope my country will view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with upright zeal, ultimate competent abilities will be consigned to as I myself must serve to the mansions of the rest. I anticipate with pleased expectation and retreat, in which I promise myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellowships. Denying the source of good laws under the free government is a favorite object of my heart. And happy reward as I trust. Say goodbye one last time.
Applause, applause, applause. Oh, so did you catch it? He said, I'm tired. I'm ready to go home. 45 years in service to this nation. I just want to go rest. And that's what he did. He went home to Mount Vernon, Virginia, and he got to rest. I would say a very deserved rest for 2 years. About 2.5 years later, he died. And that was the end of his life. As all men do, he died, and that was the end of his life. But he truly served his nation to the very end of his life and left a big mark on our country. So it has been my privilege to be here with you today as George Washington. I do believe Mr. Swanson should be back tomorrow. And all right, I'll cut the act. It's me, guys. It's me. Hey, I know I took it right to the wire. Go ahead and do what you do. And,
Yeah.
I need this. I need this. I need this. Thank you. I need this.
Here you go, Jordan. And I'll see y'all. Come on.
You're not doing it?
Oh, I did it, but
See ya.
One last time.
George Washington, go.